Have you ever wondered what a missing person case can look like when it goes cold? To find out what happened after 25 years, hit the subscribe button, like, and share, then check the next video link in the description below. In 2005, 5 years after Emily vanished, a fisherman on the Columbia River, mending his nets at dawn, noticed a small metallic glint tangled in driftwood along the shore. He reached down and pulled free a delicate silver bracelet. Curved and worn from the river's flow, it bore an engraving, EC. The bracelet's recovery reopened old wounds. DNA testing confirmed its ownership. It had belonged to Emily Carter. For Susan Carter, the news was a double-edged sword. Hope surged in her chest, yet fear returned with it. The bracelet offered no explanation, no closure. It was a ghostly reminder of Emily's last night, a fragile connection to the life that had been stolen. Seeing it, Susan said years later, it was like holding a piece of her soul. I wanted to believe she'd left it for me to find, but I also knew I'd never see her again. The story occasionally resurfaced in Ridgefield's media. Local journalists wrote retrospective pieces for the anniversaries of Emily's disappearance. Headlines read, 20 years since Emily Carter vanished, the cold case that still haunts Ridgefield. A white rose left behind, mystery at Cedar Lake. But as the years passed, these stories were treated more as human interest articles than urgent news. The town moved on the surface, but the memory of Emily remained a quiet, persistent ache. Teachers retired, classmates married, and new families moved in, yet the story never faded entirely. Every year, Susan Carter visited Cedar Lake. She carried a single white rose, placing it on a small bench near the forest edge. She whispered Emily's name, over and over, as if the words themselves could reach her daughter through time. By 2023, the Ridgefield Cold Case Unit had a new leader, Detective Laura Hines, a woman known for solving cases that had long been considered unsolvable. With a reputation for meticulous investigation and the ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, Hines had been called in to review decades-old files across Oregon. When Hines first opened Emily Carter's file, she noticed the details that had escaped previous investigators. The white rose, carefully photographed but never analyzed, caught her attention. The grainy surveillance footage, the text message, and the abandoned Honda Civic suddenly seemed like pieces of a larger puzzle, pieces that modern forensic methods could finally illuminate. Hines requested a review of the physical evidence, including the white rose, the bracelet recovered in 2005, and the prom dress preserved in the Carter home. Her approach was methodical. She read through every interview transcript, every police note, and every tip that had been recorded in the first month after Emily's disappearance. Unlike previous detectives, Hines approached the case without assumptions. Where others saw dead ends, she saw potential leads, fingerprints that could now be cross-checked with a national database, DNA traces that were impossible to analyze 2 decades prior, and digital footprints that could be reconstructed from old technology. The rose became the centerpiece of her strategy. It had sat untouched in the evidence room for 23 years, a dried and delicate remnant of that night. Hines sent it to a modern laboratory specializing in trace DNA. Weeks later, the lab reported a breakthrough. A partial DNA profile had been extracted. Hines' pulse quickened. It matched a man named Douglas Kent, a long-haul truck driver who had been serving time in Nevada for kidnapping and assault. Kent had passed through Ridgefield in May 2000. He had a criminal record, but nothing had tied him directly to Emily, until now. The case was suddenly alive again, decades after the town had almost forgotten. For the Carter family, Hines's involvement was both terrifying and liberating. Hope had been dormant for so long that it almost felt unnatural to allow it back in. Yet for Susan, hearing that a real lead had been discovered after 23 years was like the first crack of light in a long, suffocating night. I had begun to imagine my daughter as a memory, Susan said. To hear that someone might finally tell me what happened, it was both exciting and horrifying. Ridgefield, too, felt the stirrings of the past. Local media caught wind of the renewed investigation. The town once again held its collective breath. remembering the blue dress, the white rose, the vanished girl who had captured its heart and its fear all those years ago. The Ridgefield cold case unit was quiet that morning, sunlight streaking through dusty blinds onto stacks of files. Detective Laura Hines sat at her desk, reviewing Emily Carter's case notes for what felt like the 100th time. She had a notebook open, colored tabs marking leads, timelines, and evidence. Every detail mattered. Every inconsistency, every overlooked trace could be the key to solving a case that had eluded detectives for 23 years. The piece that caught her attention most was the white rose. It had been photographed, in 2000, preserved in the evidence locker, and largely ignored. Just another visual aside in the case files. But Hines saw it differently. To her, it was a silent witness, a relic carrying secrets long buried. Hines coordinated with a specialized forensic lab. Using advanced DNA extraction techniques unavailable in 2000, technicians processed the dried petals of the rose. Days later, the results came back, a partial DNA profile. Hines' heart raced as she reviewed the report. The match? Douglas Kent, a long-haul truck driver already serving time in Nevada for kidnapping and assault. A man whose routes had taken him through Ridgefield in May 2000. A man who, until now, had left no trace. The revelation sent a chill through Hines. Kent had passed through the area at the precise time of Emily's disappearance. His record of violent crimes suggested a capacity for calculated cruelty, and for the first time in decades, a tangible suspect emerged from the shadow of Emily's vanishing. Hines began meticulously reconstructing Kent's movements. Delivery logs confirmed his presence in Ridgefield during the critical week in May 2000. He owned a storage unit under an alias, purchased with cash. Surveillance footage from that era could not have captured him. There were no eyewitness accounts placing him directly with Emily, but Hines understood one principle: patterns reveal themselves, even across decades. The investigation required subtlety. Kent was in prison, his demeanor in interviews calm, almost taunting. He had served long sentences before, and he knew how to play the system. Hines prepared carefully for her first meeting, reviewing transcripts of his prior interrogations, cross-checking his alibi timelines, and preparing evidence for psychological leverage. Kent leaned back in the interview room, smirking as Hines laid out the facts. "You know why I'm here," Hines said, her voice steady, eyes fixed on him. Kent chuckled, the sound low and deliberate. "Maybe, but you won't find what you're looking for." Hines slid the lab report across the table. DNA from the white rose, linking him directly to Ridgefield on May 21, 2000. Kent's smile faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of something darker. "She shouldn't have gotten in the truck," he said finally, 6 chilling words that would echo in Hines's mind for weeks. No further details, no remorse, just the hint that Emily had encountered someone calculating, predatory, and deliberate. Armed with new warrants, law enforcement opened Kent's storage unit under heavy supervision. Inside was a macabre collection, souvenirs from multiple victims, carefully preserved, necklaces, bracelets, newspaper clippings, even photographs, each item cataloged meticulously. Among the items was Emily's missing prom photograph, folded neatly beside another dried white rose. It was a stark, cold reminder that Kent had kept fragments of his victims as trophies, preserving them as if he could control death itself. The evidence was overwhelming. Kent's methods, his movements, and the artifacts in his storage unit painted a picture of a man who had operated in secret, leaving behind only faint traces, until modern technology allowed those traces to speak. Hines reconstructed the fateful night with precision. Surveillance footage placed Emily leaving the community center at 12:17 a.m. The shadow behind her, the abandoned car with the white rose, and the cryptic text all aligned to Kent's known presence in the area. The final piece came when a forensic analyst confirmed that DNA from the rose matched Kent. Emily had been in contact with him. She had, somehow, been lured or coerced. Every detail from decades ago now fit into a coherent pattern, a timeline that revealed what previous investigators could only guess at. For Susan and Michael Carter, the news of progress was surreal. After decades of quiet suffering, hope returned in the form of a name, a face, and evidence that Emily's disappearance had not been forgotten. "It's hard to explain," Susan said in a local interview. "We had begun to imagine that Emily was just gone. But to know someone knew what happened and that finally justice could be possible, it's both terrifying and relieving." Ridgefield, too, felt the shift. Local news reported on the breakthrough. Residents whispered in stores, on porches, in cafes. The town's collective memory of Emily Carter, once buried in fear and uncertainty, was revived. Hines coordinated with Nevada authorities to bring Kent in for a formal interrogation concerning Emily's case. Every detail was planned meticulously. Questions were structured, evidence presented, psychological pressure applied. Hines knew that confronting someone like Kent required patience. He had lived decades in control, hiding his crimes carefully. This was the moment where the decades of silence might finally break. The courtroom of Ridgefield, though decades later, would be filled with a tension that had been building silently for 25 years. But before the trial, the focus was on the meticulous work of Detective Laura Hines confronting the man who had haunted the town's nightmares from behind prison walls. Kent's prison cell was stark, cold, and unyielding. Hines entered carrying the weight of years of unanswered questions. He sat waiting, calm, exuding the sort of confidence only someone who believed themselves untouchable could carry. But Hines had patience, precision, and the evidence that now left him no room to maneuver. The table between them was empty, save for a file containing photographs, DNA reports, and the items recovered from Kent's storage unit. Hines spoke slowly, deliberately, allowing each word to land. "Douglas Kent, you were in Ridgefield on May 21st, 2000, she said. "You left your DNA behind. You have kept souvenirs from that night. You know what happened to Emily Carter." Kent leaned back, smirking, his voice low and deliberate. "She shouldn't have gotten in the truck." That was all, 6 words. Yet in those 6 words was confirmation. Emily had encountered him. She had not gone missing by accident. And now, the puzzle pieces, decades old, could finally be assembled. Hines pressed further. Slowly, methodically, Kent began to unravel. He described Emily's last moments, not with remorse, but with a detached narrative of control. How he had offered her a ride when she struggled with her car keys. How he had led her into the forest. How he had kept fragments of her memory, photographs, jewelry, mementos, as trophies in his storage unit. It was about power, he admitted, to know they were mine, even after they were gone. Using Kent's directions, Hines coordinated a search near the Columbia River, not far from the location where the silver bracelet had been discovered in 2005. The forest, thick and silent, seemed to hold its breath as investigators followed the map traced by the confession. A shallow grave was found, just a few miles from the river's edge. Emily Carter's remains lay inside, remarkably preserved considering the years. Around her neck, still intact, was her prom necklace. The photograph, the white rose, the bracelet, all connected back to the chilling reality of Kent's crime. Susan Carter was allowed to visit the site under supervision. She knelt, whispering softly, placing her hands over the earth that finally held her daughter. "We found her," she whispered, tears streaming. "We finally found you." The sense of closure, while mingled with grief, was profound. Emily's story, long suspended in the uncertainty of disappearance, had returned to the realm of truth. By 2024, Douglas Kent was charged with first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed with family, friends, and journalists. The evidence from his storage unit, the DNA match from the white rose, and his confession left little room for doubt. The prosecutor laid out the sequence of events. Emily's last sighting at the Ridgefield Community Center, the abandoned Honda Civic at Cedar Lake Forest, the cryptic text message and the untraceable flip phone, the white rose and the DNA match, Kent's history of violent crimes and his storage unit full of trophies. The jury listened, rapt. Kent's demeanor remained largely indifferent, occasionally sneering, occasionally silent, but the evidence was overwhelming. After days of testimony, closing arguments, and deliberation, Kent was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge's gavel landed with finality, echoing a resolution that had taken a quarter of a century. Detective Hines traveled to Cedar Lake, the place where Emily's journey had ended. She knelt by the memorial bench, placing a single white rose upon it. This time, it was not a symbol of mystery or loss. It was peace. The town of Ridgefield, once gripped by fear and uncertainty, slowly began to heal. A scholarship was established in Emily's name, awarded to students who dreamed of investigative careers. The prom night tragedy, now etched into history, became a story of resilience and justice, proof that truth, no matter how delayed, can never be silenced forever. Emily Carter's story serves as a reminder: justice may sleep, but it never dies. Her family's perseverance, the unwavering work of Detective Hines, and the eventual exposure of Douglas Kent's crimes transformed a haunting cold case into a testament of determination, courage, and closure. Every year during prom season, Susan Carter places a white rose at the Cedar Lake Memorial Bench. It is a quiet ritual, a personal conversation with a daughter lost to time, and a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, justice can still find its way. Ridgefield remembers. Emily Carter at last rests, and the town has vowed never to forget the girl whose disappearance shaped a community for generations. The courtroom doors had closed, the gavel had fallen, and the nightmare that had haunted Ridgefield for 25 years had finally been codified in law. Douglas Kent was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a sentence that carried with it the weight of decades of fear, grief, and unanswered questions. Yet for the Carter family, the sentencing was only the beginning of a different kind of journey, one marked not by searching for answers, but by integrating the truth into a life forever shaped by absence. Ridgefield, once gripped by the chilling uncertainty of Emily Carter's disappearance, slowly began to exhale. Streets that had once felt heavy with suspicion lightened as the memory of her smile returned in shared stories and commemorations. Neighbors spoke openly about their fear, their relief, and the remarkable endurance of the Carter family. Local schools integrated Emily's story into lessons on safety, empathy, and the importance of vigilance. Teenagers learned that the world could be cruel, yes, but that truth, painstakingly pursued, could prevail. The Cedar Lake Forest, once avoided like a haunted zone, became a place where students, families, and visitors came to remember and honor Emily's life. In a ceremony at Ridgefield High School, the Emily Carter Memorial Scholarship was established, funded by community donations. It recognized students with an interest in criminal justice, investigative careers, and social advocacy. Young people inspired not just by curiosity, but by the dedication required to seek justice. The first recipient, a high school senior named Ava Thompson, accepted the award with tears in her eyes. In her speech, she said, "Emily's story reminds us that courage is quiet, that even when the world turns dark, there are people who refuse to give up, and that sometimes justice sleeps, but it never dies." Every prom season, Susan Carter placed a single white rose on the memorial bench near Cedar Lake. This ritual, a conversation with her daughter that spanned decades, had evolved. Once an act of yearning, it had become an act of peace. "I talk to her," Susan said softly one spring morning. "I tell her about the town, the scholarship, the students. I tell her that she's remembered. And she listens. I know she does." The rose, delicate and white, mirrored the one left in Emily's car the night she disappeared, but now it symbolized life reclaimed, memory honored, and a story brought to its rightful conclusion. For Detective Laura Hines, the case of Emily Carter became a defining chapter in her career. She had inherited decades of frustration, sorrow, and unanswered questions and turned them into clarity. The successful resolution reinforced her belief in persistence, modern technology, and the principle that no case is ever truly lost. It's not about catching monsters for the sake of victory, Hines said. It's about giving families the truth, no matter how long it takes. Emily's family deserved that, and now they have it. Hines often returned to Cedar Lake after the trial, sitting quietly, observing the water's reflection, listening to the whispers of the wind through the trees. The white rose on the bench remained, a quiet monument to resolution and the enduring power of justice. Emily Carter's story transcended the tragedy of her disappearance. It became a story of resilience, determination, and hope. Ridgefield's citizens, once bound by fear, were now united by memory and the knowledge that the pursuit of truth, though delayed, could never be silenced forever. For the townspeople, the prom that year became both a cautionary tale and a celebration of courage. Every year, students and families visiting the Cedar Lake Memorial Bench were reminded that one girl's life, her disappearance, and the relentless search for justice could leave a mark on an entire community, inspiring change and compassion. Emily's photograph, her bracelet, her prom necklace, and her white rose became enduring symbols, fragments of a life interrupted, yet never forgotten. The story of Emily Carter is a testament to human resilience, the persistence of a mother, the diligence of an unwavering detective, and the eventual triumph of truth over decades of uncertainty. Justice, though delayed by time and circumstance, arrived, a quiet reminder that even in darkness, light can be found. Ridgefield remembers Emily Carter not only for the tragedy that took her, but for the courage, hope, and determination that brought her story full circle. And each spring, when a white rose blooms at Cedar Lake, it carries with it the memory of a daughter lost, a town transformed, and justice served at last. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories. This is Shadows of Justice.